This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 101 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. Gary, you recently bought yourself, with your own money, a Framework 12 laptop.
I did. This is true.
So what exactly did you order?
So I ordered effectively the base model DIY edition. So this is a Core i3 1315U. So that's a couple of generations old Core i3. So in theory, ticks our box for being a machine that can run Linux well. I ordered it in black because I'm boring, frankly, and I didn't fancy the bubblegum colour.
They had all those cool colours.
Yeah, I ordered the black and grey. Sorry. I did actually look at it later on and wish I had ordered the green one, but then my wife pointed out to me that millennial green is now a thing, and all millennial people are painting their houses green, so maybe it's a good job I didn't do that. But yeah, just base model. I ordered 5 expansion cards with it, 3 USB-Cs, a USB-A, and an HDMI, and everything else I did as bring your own. And I did have a reason behind doing the bring your own, which is the crazy upcharge on the RAM and SSD that Framework charge, which is frankly ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm looking here. That's mad. £40 for one 8GB module.
Yeah, so I went with 32 gig of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD and ordered 32 gigs of DDR5 5600 for £100 less than £160 Framework wanted.
Ugh.
And I ordered a 1 terabyte WD Black M2 2230 for £60, again, £100 less than Framework were asking.
Oh, that's where the tariff money is going.
So my concern about that Framework 12 is the rubberized edges of it. I've got too many memories of kind of early 2010s tech that came with the rubberized coating, which now is just sticky and horrible. And I'm worried that that's going to happen to your Framework 12 in 10 years.
Maybe, but it does feel like a different kind of rubberized coating to what you used to get on top of a ThinkPad in the early 2000s, for example. I would say it's more akin to the type of rubber that you get on the feet of a mouse or something, or the bottom of a coaster. It's a harder rubberized coating than those.
Right.
So I'm not too concerned about it melting and turning to sticky goop like a ThinkPad X61 or something did.
So why is it there then?
Good question. I guess it does offer some kind of protection from the plastic just shattering, but it's not going to bounce if you drop it. It's not that kind of rubberized coating.
Is it just to make it feel nicer to hold? Does it feel nicer to hold?
It probably feels nicer to hold than like a budget HP or something that you get for 300 quid from Best Buy. But again, we'll get into that later because there are some build quality things that I'm not quite so pleased with, given the cost of the machine.
Well, before we go any further, I feel like we kind of buried the lead on this. We should have explained exactly what it is. It's a 12-inch laptop, but it's a touchscreen convertible. You can flip the screen round and make it effectively a tablet.
Correct, yes.
And it's got quite a large bezel as a result of that.
Yeah, although I'm not that fussed about the large bezel because it does give me somewhere to hold the laptop when it's in tablet mode.
It's very similar to a Chromebook-like device, so it does. The keyboard doesn't detach. It reminds me of education Chromebooks that flip round. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. It certainly reminds me of some of the older Chromebook spin devices that Acer did in terms of form factor.
Or Lenovo's Yoga series, whatever you want to pick.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. It is aimed at that education market, right, where it's a machine that you can give to a kid who is in middle school and not worry too much about.
But it's like twice the price of a Chromebook.
Well, and this is where we maybe get into some of the slight concerns about it, right? Because the build quality is that of a $300 or $400 laptop / Chromebook. However, it is not a £300 or £400 or dollar laptop / Chromebook.
You got it without the additional bring your own peripherals for what price again? Remind us.
So I paid £550 for the base machine and the add-in cards, and then £120 on top of that for the bring your own RAM and SSD.
Right.
And realistically, you are going to probably be buying new RAM and SSD because it's a 2230 M.2, which is the Steam Deck size NVMe drive.
Ah.
And it's DDR5 5600 DIMM, or DDR5 so 5600 SODIMM, more accurately. So probably not something you're going to have lying around either.
And single channel as well, right?
Yeah, single channel. So if you want any appreciable amount of RAM, yeah, like mine is a single 32 gig SODIMM, which is quite expensive and realistically probably only affects the GPU performance because it's an i3 with only a couple of performance cores, so I'm not too worried about it there.
Our US listeners and host might note that 550 Greater British Pounds is $740, give or take.
Yeah, it's probably about $1,000 all in. So it's not cheap, given that it is aimed at that education market where a Chromebook or Lenovo Yoga of a similar spec is going to be maybe $500-600.
I'm scrolling through the order page and you get to operating system and you can either have Windows 11 Home, £120, Windows 11 Pro, £220, or none. Should they have offered a Linux pre-install? Is this not an opportunity to sell Linux installed on something at the point of purchase?
I think that is something they could do, but equally they've worked quite well with Canonical and the Fedora project in getting 2504 and Fedora 42 just working out of the box. So they've gone to the effort, and I kind of get why they wouldn't want to do an OEM install because that's effort, right? And these are small batch production machines that they effectively build, test, take apart, and put in a box for you to then have to put back together.
And also it's worth me mentioning those options I said, it says download in brackets. So I don't think they even image the drive if you do that, but I'd have to look into that to know more. Oh, and in the FAQ, it says, can I install Linux? And it says there are guides for installing it, but it's not an option to select. So it's more about licensing, it looks like, than a pre-imaged drive.
Yeah, because you can order it with no SSD and a Windows 11 license. I don't know why you would, but you can.
So you got the DIY edition, which means you had to put it together yourself. I presume it was trivial as someone who's taken apart loads of ThinkPads in the past.
Yeah, and actually putting it together was quite a nice process. They've really thought about not having to have ribbon cables, for example. So the SSD is a toolless mechanism for inserting the SSD.
So you don't have to find one of those annoying little screws.
Don't have to find one of those annoying little screws. There's just a plastic bracket for it. The RAM, you flip a door over for the EMI stuff. You put the RAM in, you flip the door back. And then the really nice part is that the entire palm rest, keyboard, trackpad assembly connects with pogo pins. So you just sit it on top, flip the machine over, do the screws up, and that's you done. And inside the machine, for any screw that isn't a captive screw, they've also included spare screws.
That is a nice touch, given that they're just not even pennies probably for those screws.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a little bit that they have to do to put the molding in for them and the thread, right? But if something isn't a captive screw, there's a spare inside the box.
So tell us about performance and using Linux with it. Did you just install Fedora or did you try Ubuntu as well?
I tried Ubuntu 2504 briefly because that's the first USB stick I grabbed and everything worked out of the box. I only boosted from the live CD in fairness to make sure that everything was working. It was detecting the drives and memory and everything. And then installed Fedora 42 and I genuinely plugged in the USB drive, booted from it, next finished through the install, and have had to do nothing else in terms of hardware enablement. It has just worked out of the box.
Nice. And how is the hardware then? You said it does feel like a bit of a cheaper laptop. How's the screen? What about the speakers? The speakers on my 13 that they gave me for free are amazing and probably the best non-Mac speakers I've ever heard in a laptop. Presumably they're not as good in this cheaper 12.
I'll start with the positives because there are quite a few, and then I'll get onto that. So it does feel like a decently built machine. for that kind of mid-range consumer level laptop. It isn't a ThinkPad by any means, and it certainly isn't up to the quality of something like an XPS, which is aluminium body and everything. But for a laptop that's predominantly made of plastic and is a 360-degree hinge convertible, it is decent. The display is 1920 by 1200 at 12 inches, which means that I can just run it at 100% scaling without too many issues. Viewing angles are excellent. It's an IPS display. Color is a little bit, I think, where it lets itself down. I've seen a few reviews where they said that reds are sometimes a bit orangey. I haven't noticed it myself, but this is purely a productivity machine. It spends most of its time with a browser and or text editor open. So maybe that's a problem. I don't know. It looks like a perfectly normal 12-inch laptop display to me. Keyboard is pretty decent. There's a bit of flex, but it's okay. It's a decent laptop keyboard. I mean, I use a Logitech MX keys as my day-to-day keyboard. It feels at least as good to type on as that. The touchpad is a little bit of a letdown, though. So it's a kind of diving board, mechanical style touchpad, and it isn't exactly accurate in terms of manufacturing tolerances. Like mine looks a little bit skew-if compared to the rest of the machine. And I've seen reports of the sticker on top of the trackpad falling off in a couple of other reviews. Mine hasn't done that yet. It feels like a perfectly reasonable touchpad to use, but it's not ThinkPad Z13 or MacBook quality touchpad by any means.
Yeah, I was going to say you are somewhat spoiled by using a Mac quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's true. Joe, you asked about speakers. They are decent laptop speakers. They sound better than the ThinkPad L380 that I bought for a recent challenge.
That's not saying much though, is it? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, they are loud enough that if I am next to the coffee machine and watching a YouTube video, I can hear text intelligibly. And that's about what I want from laptop speakers in a kind of mid-range laptop, to be honest. They are fine.
I think the advantage here, looking at iFixit, the iFixit for this laptop is great because Framework gave iFixit everything at launch. So the touchpad replacement is stupid simple. And so if it turned out that the touchpads weren't great, whether or not they offer like a higher quality upgrade or the chance to swap it out, it is, you know, if you've ever taken a laptop apart where you have to do a full disassembly to get to the touchpad, it's certainly refreshing to look at that.
Yeah, there is a reasonable degree of confidence there that anything that is not up to snuff, I could replace easily. And I guess that kind of gets to like my view on the price of the machine. Like, it is $1,000 for what should be a $500 machine in terms of spec and build quality. But if I can upgrade it through several revisions, that delta becomes less and less each time I replace a motherboard or do an upgrade, right? It's not a whole new $500 machine I'm buying every time. So if I can get 2 upgrade cycles out of it, then it becomes effectively cost neutral at that point.
So what about the using it experience? I was surprised reading some of the reviews. People were really hard on it. And I don't know if it's because it is of a similar form factor to something like a MacBook Air, but some people are like, oh, this CPU is not very good. I'm looking at the benchmarks. It's not bad. The single thread is pretty much similar to a lot of laptops. And I didn't realize my work laptop also has this 2 P cores and mine has 12 E cores. And this one, yours has, I think, 2 P cores and 4 E cores. But the single thread rating is broadly similar between your framework and my Ultra 7 165U, which is the next year on. And then obviously you've got multi-threading, but it's punching above an 11th Gen i7 with 8 cores and 8 threads, your machine, on paper. What's it like to use?
So I haven't had any real concerns with the performance. But what I will note is that Framework, for whatever reason, have capped the maximum power that CPU can draw to, I think, 45 watts. Don't quote me on that.
Right.
which is well below the 54 watts, I think, that it can go to. So it does suffer a little bit compared to other machines with the same CPU.
Which leads me on to battery. That's what I was going to ask you, because that's the kind of thing people usually do if they get to the final phase of manufacture and then go, oh dear, the battery life is disappointing. Let's downclock the CPU and get some more runtime. What's the battery like?
Well, so I think they've limited it more for heat than battery.
Right, okay.
Because it does run fairly warm and the fan is on a reasonable amount of the time. And I usually work with headphones on, so that's not an issue for me. But I've certainly noticed it when the machine's been on my lap on a train or whatever, that the fan is running and the bottom of it is a little bit warm.
Have you noticed when it's docked, which I presume you've done a bit of, does the fan randomly spin up for like a second at a time?
Not that I've noticed.
Right, because my 13 does that, and that makes it unusable as a recording machine.
Yeah, no, the fan is generally on for a few minutes to cool the CPU and then off. So it's not a problem. And I recorded the last couple of shows that I've done on it, and you've not shouted at me for the fan noise, Jay. So I think it's probably okay. In answer to your question, Chris, about the battery life, I get somewhere between 6 and 8 hours, depending on what I'm doing, which feels in about the right ballpark for an i3 machine from a couple of years ago.
Considering the size of the chassis, the battery can't be that big as well to fit everything in.
Yeah, I think it's 50 watt hour. So
right.
It's half of what you'd see in, a 14 or 15 inch laptop. Those are normally 87, 90 watt hour, something like that.
I feel like you're the wrong person to tell us about performance, though, given that you happily used a T400 not that long ago for a day's work.
Yes, but my work has changed since then. So one of the reasons I spec'd it with 32 gig of RAM is that one of the products that I now work with / on requires a fairly beefy Red Hat VM with a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM and 8 virtual CPUs. And I've been running that on this machine as well as doing my usual daily work, which isn't that intensive, right? It's Zoom, Chrome, Slack, Firefox, a terminal, some Teams calls here and there. And the Red Hat VM has been running in the background quite happily for most of that time. So performance is okay. And I was comparing it to a 6th gen i7 machine not too far back, and it is faster than that in terms of pass mark score. So the type of machine that I would have been running as a desktop workstation 4 or 5 years ago, this now outclasses.
But it does feel like you're quite similar in feeling as when we spoke about the Fairphone before. The positives of it are great, but it's hard to reconcile the additional cost and the fact that what you get ultimately is a well-spec'd device, but not grade-spec'd, and trying to balance what you paid for it, what you get, the experience, and whether the repairability trumps all of that for the longevity is a difficult kind of sum to add up, right?
Let me summarize that question. Do you regret buying it yet?
So I don't regret buying it yet. It is a nice laptop, and it is certainly different from any other laptop in that price range that's on the market. I think to your point with the Fairphone, Chris, that was a gamble that in my case did not pay off, because I don't think that those promises have necessarily been kept in terms of software longevity, which has caused a lot of problems for me, because if I don't get those monthly updates bi-monthly like Fairphone promised on time, I can't do my work on the phone, which has actually led to me having to purchase a different phone, because if I don't get the updates within 60 days, I can't access my email, which is a problem. Incidentally, today as we record, Fairphone have only just released Android 15 for the Fairphone 5. So that has been a gamble that hasn't paid off, even though I did believe in the mission of a repairable device with the promise of 8 years of software updates and parts, etc. It remains to be seen with the Framework 12 what that's going to look like. Clearly, I've made an upfront investment in a device that on the surface I could have got for significantly less if I'd wanted the same spec. However, if you look at it in the long term as an upfront investment in a machine that I can upgrade a couple of generations of motherboard in, because, as you said, Joe, my performance requirements are not that great and a couple of generations old laptop is fine for me, then it's probably okay, right? If I could in a couple of years get a 15th gen board for it and in another couple of years get a whatever is current or a generation old then.
If Intel still exists at that point.
If Intel still exists, or if I can get an AMD board for it, right, then it pays off because I effectively spend a couple of $100s on a motherboard upgrade every couple of years and the machine then becomes cost neutral.
But then what happens to the old motherboards and things? The best thing about getting a whole laptop every few years is you can hand the old laptop down as a complete sealed unit to someone else. Whereas if you just have a motherboard.
Yeah, maybe that's not quite as easily the case, right? I mean, my hope is that in the same way that they did for the Framework 13, the community step in and make 3D printable cases or whatever for the Framework 12 motherboard. And then I could replace my mum's Wise 5070 desktop with the board from this, as an example. Or I could use it as a home server and replace the M1 Mac Mini, which will be fairly long in the tooth by then. So again, you're taking a bet, right? Is that something that people are going to do? Is it going to have as much of a cult following as the 13 did/does? I don't know. But this was a machine that did appeal to me in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
And it's presumably USB-C powered.
Yeah, hence not bothering to buy a power adapter for it. USB-C powered. It seems to work fine with every USB-C power adapter I've tried. Anything from 45 up to 165 watts. I don't know what speed it's charging at on those, but it seems fine.
And it's still using the weird dongle system, right?
Yeah, exactly the same add-in cards that all of the Framework laptops have used so far.
Yeah, I could take one out of mine and put it in yours, right?
Yes, the only slight quirk with this one is that it's USB 3.2 on the two right-hand ports and only 3.1 on the two left-hand ports. So I, for example, have connected my external display/dock to the right-hand port.
No Thunderbolt?
No Thunderbolt.
Ooh.
And that is a complaint that has been quite common on the Framework forums. No USB 4, no Thunderbolt. Even though the hardware in theory supports it, and it would be some timing chips and stuff that I think were needed to actually enable it.
I wonder why they did that then.
Well, I don't know if anyone else can speak with more authority, but I know that different models of ThinkPads have and haven't had it before, and part of it is to do with the cost of it from Intel. Is that right?
Oh, like licensing maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how right that is, so correct me if I'm wrong, anyone listening, but I'm sure I've read that before, that getting Thunderbolt certification is difficult and involves lots of factors.
I do not know if that is actually integrated to chipset or SoC on Intel's newer generations, but certainly on older ones you need a separate Thunderbolt controller that was on the PCI Express bus to handle all of that stuff.
Right.
And that in itself was an expensive part. That was actually in both ends of a lot of devices. So if you open up like an Intel 8000 series laptop and a dock from the past, 8 years, they might have the same chip in them.
Gary's right, though. I'm looking here, no Thunderbolt, Framework Laptop 12 in the forum, and one of the team has said Thunderbolt requires much more expensive retimers, so we support USB 3.2 DisplayPort output and power input on all 4 slots instead. That's their line on it.
Yeah, that's certainly what I'd read. But again, I don't know how much more expensive that additional timing hardware would have been to make it Thunderbolt.
In fact, it's Nirav who replied, who is Mr. Framework. So he's chipped in there early in April. So, that is something that's quite nice about the company, is because they're small, there's a reasonable level of transparency and there's no hiding to that, that degree.
Yeah, but then they did send every other reviewer in the world a free one of these and didn't reply to my emails when I wanted one.
There's the salt.
So I'm not salty or anything. It's not like I wanted yet another free laptop out of them.
I suppose the only other thing to mention that is a slight annoyance with this laptop is the stylus situation. So it supports both MPP and USI2 styluses. And Framework have announced, but not launched along with the laptop, which seems slightly questionable, a USI2 stylus. However, what isn't included in the laptop is anywhere to store or magnet stick to the official Framework stylus.
Oh.
So that is annoying, right? Because if these are going to be used in schools, stylus is just going to go walkabout. I have a Lenovo USI2 stylus that does work with this machine. I just had to change in the BIOS the setting to USI2, and it seems to work fine. I'm not a huge stylus user, but it seems okay. But I didn't really use it because I just keep it in the pen compartment of my bag and forget it's there, frankly.
It doesn't feel like it's integrated as part of the use style. You think back to kind of all the way back to Palm Pilots or something, some kind of telescopic stylus, clip-on stylus port makes you feel like it's part of the device instead of an Apple Pencil or something that you just kind of float about and use.
Well, I would be happier with the Apple Pencil because at least that sticks on the side of the iPad with a magnet.
Yeah.
Whereas this just floats about in my bag. And in fact, my kid wanted to do some drawing in Tux Paint when I was on a long ferry ride last week. And it seemed like the perfect thing to let him do. But I completely forgot I had the stylus. So he sat there getting greasy, jammy fingerprints all over the screen.
Well, you'll have to keep us up to date with this, Gary, as you use it over the weeks and months. I look forward to hearing a longer term review of it.
Yeah.
But with that, we'd probably better get out of here. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.